Welcome back, everyone. If you would have told me several months ago that there would be widespread support for Islamic terrorism among secular Westerners, I wouldn't have believed you. I have since learned to never underestimate the shallow, moldable minds of activists driven by the fickle winds of fashionable Western thought. And recently, we've been seeing more activism from American Muslims as well, many of whom, for some reason, cling to their religion while fleeing their home countries governed by Islamic values. And this activism is gaining swift international recognition in one U.S. state in particular. Let me give you a hint. It's one of the places where you can hear wonderful sermons like this.
One Jewish man in New York was talking to a businessman, Palestinian. Palestinian said, don't worry, Jewish man. One day will come, we will slaughter you like a sheep, and the stone and the tree will work with us like a undercover to tell us, hey, Muslim, come, there is somebody is hiding here, come kill me. Allah, make us a soldier for you, Ya Allah. Every way you want us to be, Ya Allah, with the tank, with the eyes, with the money, with the hand, make us a soldier for Islam. Make us to die, and the way you love us to die.
That's right, it's that stupid saying from Muhammad again about the talking trees and rocks and helping to kill all of the Jews. That's right, it's another Michigan hate preacher. Michigan, the premier Islamic armpit of the U.S. Let's start with some background. From WNG.org, Muslim voters in Michigan send a message. The large, uncommitted primary vote may not mean a lot now, but it reflects a growing influence. The Associated Press reports that 3 Michigan cities, I bet you can guess what their names are, each with large Arab populations, turned against President Joe Biden in the state's primary after Democratic leaders there warned for months that voters were angry about his handling of the Israel-Hamas war. Although Biden won the state with over 623,000 votes, the final results in the 3 Muslim-majority cities show that more than 100,000 Democratic voters cast ballots for uncommitted in the race. These uncommitted votes are due to concerted efforts led by Arab Muslim politicians and organizers. Palestinian-American U.S. Representative Rashida Tlaib, and I would add chief congressional anti-Semite, openly argued that Arabs and Muslims would cast their votes as uncommitted. Her sister, Layla El-Abed, led the campaign of Listen to Michigan, which pioneered the uncommitted push. The Garbage Council on American Islamic Relations also encouraged Muslims to make their vote known. If the polls are correct, Joe Biden's re-elect campaign is in trouble, and his strategists have apparently decided to take moderate voters for granted and cater instead to all of the various sorts of the radical fringes of the Democrat Party. Obviously, one of those fringes would be the Hamas lovers in Michigan, who are using their voices to vote uncommitted and pose a further threat to Biden's campaign. And people are listening, including leaders of Hezbollah.
اليوم ما يقوم به كثير ممن يتظاهرون في أمريكا طبعا يجب أن يوجه لهم الشكر والتحية، والذين أعلنوا أنهم سواء كانوا عرب أو مسلمين أو غير مسلمين من بقية الأحرار الأمريكيين مسيحيين وغيرهم في الحزب الديمقراطي اللي كتبوا لبايدن أنه غير ملتزم بانتخابك، هؤلاء مؤثرون جدا الآن في هذه المرحلة. بايدن هلأ خايفين من شغلة واحدة، أن سياسته وأداءه في غزة يؤدي إلى سقوطه في الانتخابات الرئاسية، ولذلك قاعد عم بخبط وعم بينافق وعم يلعب.
Some of what this great leader of Hezbollah says is obviously just stupid. Trying to group Christians in with his Arab-Muslim coalition is dumb, and he, like the activists themselves, drastically overestimate their actual influence. The uncommitteds will vote for Biden long before they'll vote for the guy who opened the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem and facilitated the Abraham Accords. So while Michigan Muslims can keep the queen of anti-Semitism in the House of Representatives, their voting power really doesn't go much further than that. But their activism goes all the way to the top of Hezbollah and gets publicly recognized by the leader of a group designated a terrorist organization even by Canada. This may make some Michigan Muslims pause in their fervor, but others are so drunk with Jew hatred they want to see slaughter as much as Hezbollah, like the Michigan imam I showed you earlier in the video. He's one of many, and they aren't preaching to empty mosques. Back to WNG.org, there is growing momentum for Arab Muslims in the political sphere in the United States. There is no doubt about that. If it's not significantly consequential right now, it will be in years to come because of how Arabs and Muslims are often keen to work together to achieve political victories. Politicians should be aware that what began in Michigan will likely continue to grow in influence. Most of the momentum behind the concerted Muslim efforts reflects the growing influence of Islamism in America. This ideology is adopted by many Muslim activists, aiming to elevate Islam and its political values to shape and influence society. While no one can know the intentions of any voter, Arab Muslims are clear about what they support. Their political influence will only grow in the future. Muslims in Michigan sent a clear message to Biden in the primary election, so who else is listening? Islamism, which embraces both the religious aspects of Islam and the advance of its political power, is certainly growing in the West as Muslims follow the example of Muhammad, ostensibly religious but also a warlord who launched dozens of military campaigns, oppressing and enslaving many with his imperialistic ideology of hate. Religion and conquering the world are two sides of the same Islamic coin, but the reality is that most Americans really don't like the whole Islamism agenda and will likely continue to ignore it. Then the Islamist cries will grow louder, like a 2-year-old's temper tantrum. Then what? What will the Islamists do next? Perhaps a look at British politics is the answer, which according to some is being destroyed by Islamism, as MPs resign in fear for their lives. The link to that article is in the description box, and it describes members of the British Parliament who have been intimidated, attacked, and even killed recently by Muslims. As another example, last month parliamentary procedure was changed due to threats posed by so-called Muslim protesters. These sorts of things make democratic processes, difficult. Meanwhile, many leaders in Britain remain silent out of fear of being called Islamophobes. And the result is that Islamist extremism is not effectively being tackled by the government. The public faces increased threats from terrorists, warns Prevent reviewer. Prevent is one of Britain's anti-terror programs. Islamist extremism is not being effectively tackled by the government, the independent reviewer of Prevent has said, as he warned it was fueling a dangerous surge in anti-Semitism. William Shawcross, who was the independent reviewer of the Prevent program, said the failure to take tougher action stemmed from a continuing bias within Prevent towards tackling the rise in right-wing terrorism rather than the main threat of Islamist terrorism. Mr. Shawcross, whose report was published a year ago, said he believes the bias toward right-wing terrorism is partly driven by Prevent staff's fears of being labeled racist or Islamophobic. He cited MI5 data that 75% of its caseload was focused on Islamist threats, yet the latest figures for referrals to the Prevent program showed just 11% related to Islamist terrorism. One of the reasons why there is sometimes a reluctance to address the Islamist threat is that people are frightened of being called Islamophobic or racist. It's become a hugely effective form of censorship for Western cowards. A Home Office spokesperson said the government agrees that extreme Islamist ideology presents the greatest threat to the UK and has moved swiftly to update Prevent duty guidance and training to make that clear. Now, whether or not changes actually happen or whether they're effective, this is a shocking statement to hear from the Home Office. The government agrees that extreme Islamist ideology presents the greatest threat to the UK. On the American side, it seems certain that this threat will only intensify through rhetoric, activism, and ultimately terrorist attacks. Americans can learn a lot by listening to Muslims and Islamic armpits like Dearborn and looking at the UK as an example of the consequences of getting it wrong. The question is, how many Americans are actually listening? Time will tell. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.